back. And we are back with our very special monthly guest, Turd Ferguson, for our economics and metals report. Turd Ferguson runs tfmetalsreport.com. He's the owner and publisher. Some of it is free, some of it is behind a paywall, but it is great information. Go there, subscribe, support him. He's not giving you false information, and if you're a regular listener of the show, you know how intelligent he is. And his, so many people are just flocking to Turd's site that he's picking up more and more advertisers. He just picked up Nevada Exploration Inc. He did an article on them about a week ago. Met with their CEO. It sounds like you're growing and expanding over there, Turd. Congratulations, man.
Hey, thanks, Jake. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, the site has never been doing better. I mean, it's been a tough 4 or 5 years in the markets, but it's not like a subscription's a couple of cups of coffee a month. It's $10, and so it's not like we're asking a lot to have people join, but it is still a commitment, and I'm happy to say that we've never had more subscribers than we have right now. So the metals seem to be turning, and the world economy is turning as well, and we're set up for a pretty interesting 2016.
Well, it's dangerous out there, and you're giving people really good advice on how to protect themselves against whatever's happening out there. So the first article I'd like to dive into is a geopolitical one that you just wrote. It came out today, actually. Dangerous moves in the new Cold War, the escalation on both sides, but you state that Russia isn't really the aggressor here. That you could make a strong case that the U.S. and NATO are actually the aggressor in this situation, and you've been studying up on your Russian history and your understanding of all these situations. So I'd like to get your take on what's going on between the U.S., NATO, and Russia right now.
Well, this has been an impending disaster, for almost a little over 2 years. Got to go all the way back to February of 2014, when it's quite clear, you won't get this in the U.S. media, this is not the official line, but it was a U.S.-sponsored coup in Ukraine that prompted the riots and the festivals, whatever you want to call them, in the Maidan Square in Kiev. There were snipers on the roof taking pot shots at people, and eventually the elected president was deposed, was kicked out of the country, and a new American pilot was put in. We've got recorded audio of U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland on the phone talking to the ambassador of the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine, scheming this whole thing out, talking about who they want to put in there as a replacement for the elected president. And it rapidly escalated from there. We've tried to lay the blame for all of it on Russia and try to make them out as the bad guys, and they're not blameless, but this idea that that we're the good guys and we're just simply trying to protect the Ukrainians and protect the Baltic states from that evil rascal, Antichrist Putin, is this notion that's been put out there by the American War Party and their kind of sycophants in the media, and nobody understands it, and it's extraordinarily dangerous time. I would contend, being as a student of history, this is more dangerous today than it was even during 1962 in the lead up and then getting into the Cuban Missile Crisis. What's disastrous, the bad news that happened this week, is an announcement by the Pentagon that they want to quadruple their budget for what they call defense of the Baltic states. And we're talking about, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, places like that. In doing so, like I said, quadrupling the budget, they'll run an annual budget in protecting those states, up to $3.4 billion. We're going to have a full armed and manned combat brigade that is going to kind of rotate between those states, and it is the first time ever that we will have U.S. troops stationed directly on the Russian border. If you go back to the Cold War, back when I was a kid, the farthest east the U.S. extended was Berlin, West Berlin. And now we are putting troops on the Russian border. And let's just see, how do you think the debate would go in Washington, Jake, if all of a sudden the Russians were putting troops on the Mexican border? You know, or if you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, the audacity of putting missiles in Cuba just 90 minutes away. So this is scary stuff, and very few people in the U.S. are following it. They're just spoon-fed what the American media has to say. And if you really want to get cynical and dastardly about it, you could make an easy leap of, I guess, logical conclusion from the fragile terminal state of our economy and our economic system to this idea that maybe, hey, we can cover it all up with a good war of near extinction. We'll see. It's had me concerned for 2 years, and it's not getting any better.
You say in this article that these are the geopolitical consequences of the end of the Greek Keynesian experiment. Can you explain further?
Yeah, the end of the Great Keynesian experiment is something we've talked about at my site for 5 years. And Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, was kind of the godfather of this debt-fueled monetary system in which we exist. And we've reached kind of the terminal phase. The debt is now so great. It's the U.S. national debt is now $19 trillion that you just can't really service any longer. And everything is starting to break down. 25% of the countries that have global GDP, those countries have negative interest rates. Negative interest rates on bonds in Germany, negative interest rates now in Japan. It's insane. And everything is falling apart. And again, I guess that's what that means, is that as our system breaks apart and ends, the global dollar reserve currency system comes to an end. These transitions don't usually happen peacefully. History is replete with examples of, one country having that power, that exorbitant privilege of having the reserve currency status. But it's a transitory thing. It doesn't last forever. We've had it for 70 years, and our time is just about up. And usually that transition from who has the power to who's taking the power doesn't go peacefully. And that's what I fear we're building toward.
So let's get into this. Moving on a little bit.
on a lighter note, Jake.
Yeah. It was a tough transition to the next segment.
Yeah.
The S&P 500 death candle update. So we've been talking about this death candle for the past couple months now, and
since August.
Yeah, since August, and so we have an update to provide today. So what is that exactly, Turd?
Okay, this is serious stuff. I mean, we might joke around a lot, and we got our fingers in a lot of different pies trying to keep track of all this stuff. So back in August, I noticed if you pull up a monthly chart of the S&P 500, that key stock market index in the U.S., and you go back 25 years, you can see 3 clear bull markets and 2 clear bear markets. And I started thinking, okay, well, what can history teach us? So what can we look for as a guide to see that, when a bull market ends and a bear market begins? And I noticed that if you go back to January of 2000, the bull market from 95 to 99 ended. That was kind of the dot-com bubble. If you go back to January of 2008, the bull market from 2003 through 2007 ended. That was the real estate bubble. And then if you look now at August 2015, I think you can make the case that this latest bull market had ended, and you can call that any kind of bubble you want, the currency bubble, the money bubble, the debt bubble, or whatever you want to call it. What happened, if you measure those months when the stock market, bull market ended, December 2000, the way that month played out was almost identical to how it played out in January 2008, and almost identical to how it played out in August of 2015. Well, that got my attention. I thought, wow, well, let's see if any other similarities come down the road in the next couple months. In the early January, late December of 2001, January 2001, the market rebounded after that death candle of December 2000. And there was kind of what we called a green candle of hope, where everybody, hey, the market's coming back. Okay, that was just a little blip. That's nothing to be worried about. Everything's going to be fine. There was also a green candle of hope in the spring of 2008. And so I thought, well, if this history is going to repeat itself again, there should be some green candles of hope in the fall of 2015, and there were. In fact, just like those death candles, the total recovery in the fall of 2015 was almost identical to the spring of 2008 and to January of 2001. Oh, now it's really getting kind of freaky, right, Jake? So I thought, okay, how are we going to know then if history is repeating itself and this market is doomed to fall at least 50% again? And I started looking for technical indicators, and I found one by looking at the chart again. And what we like to track when we follow the market are what we call moving averages. I don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but you can measure moving averages over certain amounts of time. And we're looking at the long-term chart, so I thought, well, let's look at a 6-month moving average of the S&P, where it closes at the end of each month. And let's look at a 24-month moving average. And what we found is that the death knell, the final nail in the coffin, the door slamming shut, whatever you want to call it, on those bull markets in 2001 and in 2008, was a bearish crossing, a bearish breaking down of the 6-month moving average to the 24-month. And I thought, well, if that happens, that would be the third indicator, that would be the third sign that we are repeating history, and man, you better watch out. Well, it dang near happened at the end of January. If it hadn't been for the Bank of Japan-induced 40-point S&P rally last Friday, it would have happened at the monthly close last Friday. Instead, those lines have not yet crossed, so they're only separated by like one S&P point. So now, if February turns out to be a lousy month, the lines will cross. Anyway, I don't want to bore everybody with numbers and details. I'll just repeat what we've said now every time we've talked since August, Jake. If you suffered through the last big, huge financial crisis breakdown, the old joke was that your 401k became a 201k. And if that put your retirement plans on hold, if that jeopardized your retirement future, your investment future, all that stuff, but lo and behold, the Fed created $3 trillion, and the banks pumped up the stock market, and all of a sudden your 401k's back. Well, now is the time to be cautious. Now is not the time to just sit there and listen to cheerleaders on CNBC with your fingers crossed thinking, everything's fine. You are truly, we'll keep the metaphors rolling, Jake, you are whistling past the graveyard. This market has all indications that it is breaking down again like 2001 and 2008. The bear markets those years, the market fell over 50% from peak to trough. That would take the Dow Jones back under 10,000 from where it is now, over 16,000. If you can't stomach that, if that would delay your retirement plans again, you've got to be cautious. You've got to be getting out of this market and being very, very, very diligent and, like I said, cautious about what might happen going forward.
I mean, it almost doesn't even seem worth it to have any sort of 401k or anything like that, or even be involved in stocks long term whatsoever. I mean, you have every 8-9 years or so, you go through a massive correction or a recession, or I mean, you could argue we've been in a depression for quite some time now. And your 401k just gets completely wiped out, and then you start again, and then you work your way back up to your original principal or whatever, and then you start all over again. It's a con game. It's ridiculous.
Jake, some people have asked me after I quit being a stockbroker and all the other jobs I had in the security industry, and I got out in 2008. And on my bio, for the longest time, I've talked about the fraud of financial planning and the financial industry. And underlying that statement, what I mean by that is these mutual fund companies and the stockbrokers and the financial planners, they all go out there and they talk about how the stock market goes up 10% a year, and go back to 1929 and all this mumbo jumbo. But no, that's not what people do, man. Like you said, nobody bought the S&P at 666 in March of 2009 and rode it all the way up to the peak at 2120 last summer. People don't do that. They sit there and, they don't buy until they get to the very end. People get sucked in at the end. I remember seeing a Money Magazine article in 1999. and it was talking about a company called Morningstar had done this exhaustive study that the average mutual fund over the since 1987 had been up 12% a year annualized, but the average investor was up 1.5%. And that's because nobody just buys and holds. I mean, and you got all these dips in between, and you sell out, at the bottom, and you buy at the top, and you're right. It is deceiving, and the only people that consistently make money is the house being the banks. The Federal Reserve prints endless supply of money from thin air, devaluing your savings, devaluing your stored hard work. They then charge interest on this money that they create from thin air. Their banks charge interest. There's a lot of talk in this election season, Jake, about income inequality and how unfair the system is, and the 1% and the middle class getting squeezed and all that stuff. All of that is due to the Federal Reserve System that was instituted over 100 years ago. All the politicians are party to it because they use the Federal Reserve and the banks to create the money so they can fund the programs and buy the votes. And then these politicians try to pit us all against each other by saying, no, that's the Democrats' fault. No, it's the Republicans' fault. Vote for them. Vote for us. At the end of the day, it's lay all of the blame for income inequality, the declining standard of living, the fact that the value of the dollar has declined by 98% in 100 years, lay it all at the feet of the Federal Reserve. And these bankers all sit there, especially since 2008. They've all continued to get rich, continue all to get their bonuses. And for the average guy, it all just gets worse and worse. That's the end. That's where we're headed. That's where it's just going to get worse and worse for all of us. And then finally one day, it'll get so bad that the Federal Reserve System will go away. But unfortunately, we're a long ways away from that, and the pain is only going to continue. Gosh, this is a fun call, isn't it? I bet there's all kinds of happy listeners out
there. There's some 30-year-old man who just started probably cutting himself again due to what we're talking about right now, or something.
Yeah, he's like, I never should have quit that smoking weed and sniffing glue and all that kind of stuff because it ain't worth it. And in today's market, there's this illusion that there's a stock market. That, you watch CNBC or listen to Bloomberg, and they all want to make it sound like, that there's all these people out there, doing their homework and buying 200 shares of Coca-Cola, and it's this capitalist structure and all that. This is all nonsense. Fully 80% of the volume on the futures exchanges and on the New York Stock Exchange and on the NASDAQ, it's all just computers. It's high-frequency trading computers, swapping stocks back and forth. There's no stock market. It's not a reflection of the U.S. economy. I mean, like today, stock market rallied today because crude oil rallied today. That's the main reason. And wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. How could that be? If you take that to its logical extension, then we should just completely carpet bomb and nuclear bomb the Middle East because that would wipe out all the oil production. Oil would go to $300 a barrel, and the stock market then would go to $90,000, right? It doesn't make any sense. But these computers are all programmed to buy or sell stocks based off of, little indicators like what the price of crude oil is doing today. And it doesn't mean the stock market went up today. It doesn't mean the U.S. economy got any better. Doesn't mean the U.S. economy got any worse. It's all just a sham and an illusion. And to your original point, why does anybody really fiddle with it? Well, you've got to, the responsible, prudent individual has to make long-term plans, has to be wise. Their savings is just a reflection of their stored hard work, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, if you put a little money in the stock market, if you think that it'll help you keep up with inflation and the devaluation of the currency, but boy, you've also got to look at other investments, whether it's real estate, precious metals, all kinds of hard assets.
Sure.
There's a responsible way of doing it that's out there, and that's what people have to search for.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems hard assets, like you just said, it's just a reasonable way to go. It's
Dude, how many times, I don't know, I'm just turned 50, Jake, and so my grandparents lived through the Great Depression, and I was, they didn't start to pass away until I was 20, 25, and so I was blessed to have substantive discussions with them as I was starting to pay attention, back in high school and college. And man, you talk to somebody that lived through the Great Depression, they look at this stuff a little differently than the average 28-year-old hedge fund manager. Some punk that just got an MBA, and now he works on Wall Street, as a junior partner at Goldman Sachs. I mean, somebody who lived through the Great Depression, that canned stuff and held on to cash because they were afraid the bank was going to close and they'd lose all their cash. That changes you. That affects you as a person. And there's really nobody left around that's ever been through that. And so, again, you just can't sit there, like I said, whistling past the graveyard, thinking that tomorrow's going to be just like yesterday. We are in dangerous times, whether it's economically or geopolitically, as we discussed. And this is a time to be cautious and taking steps and being alert, and what they call in the military, be situationally aware, be alert and aware of what's going on around you, because things can change at a moment's notice.
I was reading this article on your site, tfmetalsreport.com, connecting the COMEX dots, and this is fascinating. This is if anyone is decided to go click on this article or didn't, it's about the physical distribution of gold from the COMEX gold inventory. At one point, you describe it as the bullion bank circle jerk. Can you get into that, Turd?
How can I easily explain that in its simplest terms? The price of gold that anybody sees crawl across their screen on Yahoo or Bloomberg, that's the price. What we quote all the time is the price is derived somehow on this COMEX exchange in New York. And what that is, that's just a derivative exchange, what we call a futures exchange. And it's a swapping of futures contracts. You got buyers and sellers, and they arrive at a price, and that's the price then that gets quoted. That price has been taken, used in London, where London, for the last 120 years or so, has set the global physical wholesale price every day. And now that price is determined by this futures trading. Well, the key underlying all of this is physical exchange of metal. You can have your paper futures exchange and swap, derivative contracts back and forth by computer. But if there's, at the end of the day, if there's no physical metal, no physical gold in this case, changing hands at the price that you discovered, then you haven't discovered anything. You haven't discovered the price of gold. You've discovered the price of your paper derivative contracts. That's it. So the COMEX keeps up this charade of physical delivery 6 times a year. February is a delivery month. And they put out delivery notices, and they say, oh, yes, so-and-so, this bank, stood for delivery and took delivery of 100 contracts. That's 10,000 ounces. And it was held in this vault, and it's going to continue to be held. And it's all just a sham. And if you follow this on a monthly basis, you'll see 1 month, the house account, the proprietary account of, say, J.P. Morgan will take all the delivery, alleged delivery. And the gold will come out of the house account or the proprietary account of HSBC or Scotiabank out of Canada. And then 2 months later, J.P. Morgan will turn around and issue the gold that they just took in delivery form and issue it back out, and it'll be HSBC's turn and Scotia's turn to take delivery. And that's the circle jerk. And it's all to create this illusion that physical metal is actually changing hands at the price that they found. Because again, without physical delivery, without a physical exchange at that price, then you don't have anything. You just have the price of your derivative contracts. These exchanges, there are all kinds of anecdotal stories about London shipping out 2,000 metric tons last year, their vaults being empty, living off of flow. The COMEX exchange in New York used to have as many as 5 million ounces of gold marked for sale. A year ago they had 1 million ounces, and now they're down to about 100,000. What they do then is they just journal some of the other gold that they held in the vaults. It's not technically for sale, and then they pretend that it is for sale when the time comes. It's just a big shake. I think if people are listening, they recognize the absurdity of all this. There's no actual gold changing hands. at the price that's derived electronically by these computers. But yet that's the price we use. The interesting thing now, the price has been driven down so far that the demand from countries in the East like Russia, China, India is so great that they are soaking up. They see this bargain, and they recognize $1,100 for an ounce of gold is an extraordinary value. They don't want to continue holding dollars anyway, so they exchange their dollars. They take their dollars and exchange them for gold. And now the Western supply, as I mentioned, seems to be disappearing. And you've got these exchanges, these paper exchanges that are determining this price. They're built on this leverage and this confidence game that, yeah, I own shares of the GLD ETF, or I own this bank tells me that I own gold. They've only given me a little piece of paper that says I own gold. I don't actually hold it in my two hands, but they tell me I've got it. And this confidence game that the gold is there if you want it. If all of a sudden everybody shows up because the gold is gone, and everybody shows up at the same time wanting the same gold, Jake, that's when it's going to get real fun. Because the price that's discovered when real gold changes hands ain't going to be $1,140. And that's the moment that we're all anticipating sometime in the future. Hopefully the near future.
So in order to stave this off, essentially, they're just creating a deeper plot line for their con game with this shifting. Yeah.
It's real, almost a desperation, Jake, because the demand from the East is so great that they keep pushing the price lower and lower, increasing the demand from the East, but depressing sentiment and demand from the West. I mean, nobody wants gold in the U.S. Nobody wants gold in Europe, right? It's a Wall Street Journal wrote about it last summer, said it was a pet rock. What do you want it for? All of that is designed to limit physical demand from the West, because again, as soon as there's demand here in the West, in the U.S. and in Europe, to try to meet that physical demand with the ongoing physical demand from the East, the whole system is going to break down. So that's why we keep talking about this year just being a crazy year. Not only in the gold market, but we talked about the stock market as well, and the bond markets with the negative interest rates. And I just think this is going to be a crazy year, and I think it's going to be fun for you and I as we go through it to talk about it every month and just see how things have changed, because it's just going to be a year of consequence, that's for sure.
Do you think this is going to be the year of reckoning, so to speak?
Maybe. It's impossible to say. You know, I've had this site since 2010. I didn't think even before I started the site, I didn't think we'd get through 2009. And, but the Fed forced the Financial Accounting Standards Board to change their accounting rules so the banks that were technically insolvent were somehow made into zombies and kept alive. And so we made it through 2009. And then the Fed prints $600 billion from thin air in 2010, and we make it through there. And then the Fed starts their Operation Twist, and we make it through 11 and 12. And then they start QE3, and then all of a sudden the ECB starts QE, and the Bank of Japan, and now we're going to negative interest rates. And all of this stuff is being done in a desperate flame. It's like the drowning man, with like lead weights around his ankles, that Luca Brasi, being sent, to swim with the fishes. And instead, he's just flailing his arms trying to stay afloat, doing everything possible. But, man, Mother Nature's going to take over at some point. Luca's going to sink. And that's going to happen in the financial system, too. But predicting it's going to be next week, that's a fool's errand. You just have to know that the math is against us. We've reached this terminal end of the Keynesian experiment. And so you just use this time to stay situationally aware, plan, prepare, help your friends and family wake up, and then await the inevitable outcome.
And like you said, it all comes full circle, really. I mean, all of this brings us to the brink of a really big war, possibly with Russia.
That's the main. You can survive the financial stuff. You can plan and prepare, and people go so far, to stock food, and all that kind of stuff, and that's smart. I'm not trying to say that's not smart, but man, if we get to that point, a Cuban Missile Crisis type thing, it doesn't matter how much food you got stocked. We're all going to get a chance to meet our maker, unfortunately. And let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Amen to that. Turd Ferguson, tfmetalsreport.com. Go to tfmetalsreport.com. Subscribe. He's got obviously wonderful information. If you've been listening to this program, you know the man is smart. He knows his geopolitical stuff, his economic stuff, and it's worth subscribing to. Couple cups of coffee, like Turd said. Thank you again, Turd, and talk to you next month.
Jake, it's always a pleasure. Keep a cool one in the fridge for me, and we'll talk again next month.
All right. And that was Turd Ferguson of tfmetalsreport.com. We will be back next week with another great guest and our regular guests as well, Wayne Madsen and Wolf Richter of wolfstreet.com for our economics report. So we will talk to you next week. Black Tower Radio. Stay tuned. We're out.